أعتقد أن أوروبا الجديدة هي الشرق الأوسط.
Saudi Arabia, the world's biggest oil.
Saudi Arabia has set a new target.
Saudi Arabia, one of the world's
Saudi
biggest
Arabia is making massive strides to green its desert land.
In Saudi Arabia, one is to help plant 450 million trees by 2030.
Saudi Arabia just declared war on its own desert. 10 billion trees planted nationwide in a country where 95% of the land is sand and rain, in a good year, barely clears 4 inches, a third of what falls on London in the same 12 months. Picture that gap for a second. London, a city not exactly famous for sunshine, still gets soaked by comparison. That's the baseline they're planting into, and right now, against every reasonable expectation, they're winning. Cranes are up, budgets are spent, trees are already in the ground, in soil so hard a crew drilling into it, past 45 degrees, would tell you their shovels bounce back before the dirt gives way at all. But there's a second project running underneath the first, quieter, buried literally underground, and a third, bigger than both combined, that doesn't even start with a tree, it starts with a runway. None of these began as one story. Each one has its own launch date, its own price tag, its own headline. By the end, they become one. And the seam where they connect is the part almost nobody talking about this country ever mentions. To understand why, go back to 2016, because nothing that follows makes sense without it.
Price of a barrel of oil has gone from about...
Oil prices have plunged on the hope of an
oil prices this morning with those talks.
Oil prices are recovering some of the losses sustained over the weekend.
Oil prices have plunged over the past.
Oil prices have just crashed, and Riyadh is burning through its own reserves simply to keep the lights on. A deputy crown prince, not yet 31, walks in front of the cameras with a roadmap called Vision 2030, and beneath the whole plan sits one number like a fault line. 80 cents of every government dollar that year comes from a single product. One more price crash, and the system buckles. This wasn't a country planning for growth. It was a country planning for survival, and everyone in the room knew it, even if nobody said it that plainly on camera. The plan doesn't say plant trees. It says something colder. Stop depending on what's under the ground before what's under the ground stops depending on you. That's the seed everything else grows from, and it splits into 3 places at once, starting with a city. March 2019, Riyadh sets a target that sounds almost absurd. Multiply the capital's green space per person by 16, using 7.5 million trees, under a name gentle enough to undersell what it requires: Green Riyadh. What the ribbon cutting doesn't dwell on is that none of it survives on rainfall. Engineers had to bury 1,350 kilometers of pipe beneath the city, roughly the distance from Riyadh to Cairo, just to keep the trees alive on treated sewage instead of drinking water. Every drop that reaches a root has already passed through a toilet, a treatment plant, and a pump station first. So what does that actually mean? It means this entire forest survives on a supply chain nobody can see, running under every street it shades. And so far, it's working. The pipes are full, the seedlings are growing, but 1,300 kilometers of recycled water is a city-sized answer. And what comes next isn't city-sized at all. On that same afternoon, the same king unveils something stranger, a park built where the capital's old airbase used to sit. In the earliest renderings, you can still make out the runways underneath the garden beds, like a photograph someone forgot to finish erasing. By the time contracts are signed, the footprint has grown past 16 square kilometers, roughly 5 Central Parks or 7 Hyde Parks, with $1 billion committed in a single month before one tree touches the ground. Final price, $23 billion, with up to 70,000 jobs attached, and a 92,000-seat stadium for the 2034 World Cup, sitting on ground jets once taxied across. For decades, that ground existed to launch things into the air as fast as possible, nothing alive anywhere near the tarmac. Now it's being asked to grow 1 million trees and host a World Cup final. Nobody erased the airport. They changed its job. Why build something this loud in the first place? Because a paragraph in a government report convinces nobody. And a park is something a person can walk into, film, and post, which turns out to be the entire design brief, not an accident of it. The park also has lakes, fountains, and a man-made valley cutting through the center, built into ground that hasn't held standing water on its own in longer than anyone can date. Every drop of it is pulled from the same stretch network already feeding trees across the rest of the city. 2 projects, 1 pipe, already competing for it, and the largest of the three, the one that dwarfs the other two put together, hasn't even entered the story yet. 2 years later, the same prince, now crown prince, stands up again, and this time the number isn't in the millions. It's 10 billion trees, nationwide, under the Saudi Green Initiative. Pledges cross 700 billion riyals within months. Officials go back to actually measure how much degraded land needs restoring. The first estimate was 40 million hectares, and once real surveys came in, that number had nearly doubled. By year's end, the country has planted close to 44 million trees, a sliver of 10 billion, technically, but more than most nations manage in a century, compressed into a handful of years. On the coast, an $8 billion hydrogen plant rises, running entirely on sun and wind, designed to be the largest of its kind anywhere on Earth. Nearly a third of the country, close to the size of France, gets marked for protection. With animals like the Arabian oryx slated to return to land, they vanished from decades ago. And back in the city, every one of the 99 tree species allowed onto the approved list was chosen for exactly one trait: the ability to survive on almost nothing, in soil and heat that would kill most ornamental species within a season. Nothing decorative made the cut. This was never about beauty first. If there's a single idea worth carrying past this video, it's this. The most remarkable engineering stories rarely stay about the machines or the trees for very long. They end up being about the decisions and assumptions underneath them, made years before anyone was watching. And this one has a decision buried under it that most coverage never gets to. Now here's where this stops being the story you thought you were watching. Every one of these three projects, the city, the park, the national forest, is drinking from the exact same well, and it isn't rain filling it back up. Most of the water is pulled from the coast through machines that turn seawater drinkable while burning through enormous amounts of energy. And this country already runs more of those machines than almost anywhere on Earth. They now have to grow faster than the forest they're feeding just to keep pace. Underground, older reserves drop every year, water that took thousands of years to collect and won't be refilled on any human timeline once it's gone. No pipeline reverses that. No decree does either, and sitting beside all three projects is a number none of the press conferences mention. This country still pumps close to 10 million barrels of oil a day, near the top of every producer alive. The Green Initiative talks about cutting emissions. It never talks about cutting oil, because the trees, the park, and the forest are all being paid for by the very export they exist to eventually replace, not a contradiction hiding in the plan. The only way the plan gets funded at all, the same industry that made the desert dangerous to depend on, is the one still writing every check. So which is it? A genuine transformation, or the best financed, best photographed campaign a desert has ever produced? Honestly, both, and that's not a dodge. It's the actual answer. Some of what's being attempted here has never been tried anywhere by anyone at this size. Desert-scale hydrogen, restoration across land bigger than most countries, a forest measured in population instead of acreage. Skeptics have a real case too. Some of this is optics, built for cameras as much as for canopy, and even a surviving tree isn't automatically a win, because deserts are ecosystems too, built for creatures that evolved to need almost nothing. Plant the wrong species in the wrong place at national scale, and nothing gets restored. One desert just trades places with another, with better landscaping and a much bigger bill attached to it. 3 projects, 1 well, 1 clock, running under all of them at once. The desert has never been in a hurry to answer.